The question has to do with birth, in reference to death, of course. Specifically about how does it arise, as we look at it from the context of dependent arising. The conditionality. We like to look at things in small compartments, and specifically in singular fashion, as in, this is the only compartment. We don't even look at the relationships between the compartments of events that happen, compartments of events, that is, or links, the Buddha would call it, the various different states of conditionality, one flowing into the other. What we like to do is simplify in life, depending on our proclivities, depending on how we feel about things. The other day, the question was about the emotional states that are underlying our actions, our motives, lying or being found within the moods, emotional moods, that we never question. Well, it follows on that, today's reply to this question about jati, birth. For a long time, unfortunately, people had looked at, to this day, I guess you could say, there's many circles of, people who look at dependent arising in 3 different lifetimes, as if the 12 links are referring to 3 different lifetimes, meaning things that happened previously in a different lifetime, in the past, things that are happening currently, and things that will happen in the future if this goes on. So basically what this says is 2 parts of the dependent arising principle are outside your control. Only this, whatever you can control, let's say not having, starting from the back, not having the grabbing attitude, upadana. Prior to that, not having the craving and the constant thirst for more, tanha. Looking at feeling, vedana, whether it's pleasant, painful, or neutral. The contact being made, right? And then the 6 sense spheres, looking at them while this is happening. So basically, people look at this and leave out nama rupa and consciousness, all these other things in the background, especially the sankharas, in a different lifetime. And similarly, the early commentators have mentioned how, or pushed for the wrong interpretation, their wrong interpretation, that the jati, once that happens, you are in a different lifetime. So you don't technically have control over that. These were not what the Buddha taught, of course. These came from people's ignorance, which unfortunately are still promulgated in certain circles, as I mentioned. Anyhow, coming back to jati, it is like falling off of a cliff. It's like gravity. Gravity, or a momentum, if you're coming down the hill with a skateboard, or driving a car or a bicycle, any mode of transportation, and without any brakes, by the way. Just like falling off a cliff does not You can't just suddenly pull on the brakes and stop in midair. Unless you have psychic powers or something. But jati is when the person is falling already off the cliff, off the edge of the cliff. What does that mean when they're falling? Well, that means that the person was on the edge of the cliff before they fell. Yes? They got themselves to the edge of the cliff. That is bhava. That is the desire to re-become. It's not becoming, it's not, even though people like to simplify it with one word. With Pali, fortunately or unfortunately, we cannot just, it's one word, bhava, even though the roots can be separated, etc. But in English, we can't expect that. But unfortunately, many translators continue to use just one word to describe something as deep as, whether it's jati, bhava, etc. So anyhow, in order for the person to fall off, the person or the thing, the edge of the cliff, they have to have first been right there on the edge of the cliff. They must have brought themselves there to the edge of the cliff, walked or got themselves there somehow. That would be upadana. The tendency to grab, to hold on. To what? To states of being. Now it could be anything. It could be good or bad, or neutral, as in the state of delusion. You just want to stay deluded about things, about the world, about how you do things, how you end up doing things. Why do you end up? Grabbing doesn't like to ask questions. Upadana doesn't like to ask questions. It just goes, as they say, with the flow. Well, unfortunately, the flow is going downward, downstream. It's dragging you with it, pulling you. Like once you're inside the Niagara Falls, sorry, you can't, when it's off the edge, you're going down. And that means that we've passed the stage of upadana, we've passed the stage of bhava, which is the desire to re-become, and we're going down already. That is, you are in the momentum. So you cannot stop while you're in that momentum, the birth stage of dependent arising. If you're going down the hill with a skateboard, you have to wait for the terrain to flatten, to level off, to become a plateau, where slowly the momentum will stop, will come to an end. And that means you're in the life already. So now I mentioned about the 3 lifetime wrong theory. The Buddha never taught that. But for obvious reasons, people made that misconception because it's a word that says jati, which means birth. So on the surface level, when you look at jati, you're thinking, oh, it's birth. Well, no, not just an actual physical birth of, let's say, a child, or birth of something that had to rely on these other phases. Craving, because you had an experience, your feelings were triggered, you had a good feeling or painful feeling attached to that experience, the contact being made. Because of that, you had craving arise, and you started looking for it, either to push it away or to go head first into it, like a moth goes into a flame, the candlelight at night. The moth, as if like, it's the gravitational pull, in a sense, is so strong for the moth that it has no control other than to just slam itself and burn itself within the flames of the candle. That's the drive for tanha. Now once you do that, once you're in that mode rather, you're already stuck, you're locked on. in the movie Star Wars, the original ones, the Death Star, once a ship came close, people born in the 80s, 90s, I guess even now, can appreciate the image, I guess, I hope. I grew up in the 80s, so this was like 70s, 80s. So the Black Star, once a ship came in, like Millennium Falcon, when it came in, suddenly it found itself no longer able to control its trajectory, because the Death Star is locked on gravitationally. It's pulling the ship towards it. The ship has no control. You can turn on the engine, this and that. It has taken over. This is what happens when we don't have sati, when we don't have mindfulness, awareness of what is it that I'm doing. Why does my mind always seem to go there? Remember, Upadana doesn't like to ask questions. The grabbing tendency that we have. Now once you have that and it's become like a normal functioning mechanism for you, in a sense, the way things are done for you in your mind, no questions asked, then you find yourself circling the drain, which means the drain of the desire to re-become, to re-experience. That's another way of looking at bhava, re-experience. Now, when you have that desire to that point, that means you're at the edge of the cliff that I was using that image. You're there. So now all it takes is tiny little circumstances to readjust themselves, small variables to take place, small things, and you're off the edge. You've fallen. But what got you there to the edge? People don't ask that. People look at jati. Oh, I'm falling. Oh, Again, these are metaphors I'm using for the becoming leading to a new birth, meaning a new state. When you are have linked yourself up with the desire to achieve something, or not achieve, but the desire to enter a new experience or a re-experiencing of something that passed, there's a change that you're looking forward to. What we're talking about is the beginnings of jati. So new experience, longing for it, is also birth, because it's a new experience you're looking for. Well, when you push back and look at the bigger picture as far as lifetimes go, what that translates into is a actual new birth. New embryo, new birth, new legs, new head, new arms, in the case of, I guess, a mammal or a human. So we can look at jati in two ways. One that pertains to moment experiencing life, the same lifetime, as well as, on the macro level, we're talking about the person's transportation, or rather moving from life to life, from death to birth, to death, to birth, to death, to birth, etc., ongoing. And the whole path of the Dhamma, of Buddhism, what the Buddha taught, is all about cutting that off. The birth, death, and all the drama, all the painful experiences that we have to undergo. And delusion is terrible. It's worse than painful experience. The delusion, or sticking our head into the sand and expecting things to change. That's another form of jati, by the way. When we want to just ignore the Dhamma, when we want to say, well, I have my own beliefs. I don't believe in karma. I don't believe in causality. I don't believe this. Well, you're simply enjoying the fares of yesterday. Yes, whatever you've done, the good things. That's why you're still here, and your skin is not burning as you sit there. You don't have incredible, excruciating painful experiences that you would when you were in the hell realms. That's why the human birth is a blessing, is heavenly compared to the birth into the hell realms, or an animal realm, for that matter. But it's only temporary, because what are you doing? Because you're just cashing in on past, good deeds you've done. The credit is what you're using, what you're going on. So jati has everything to do with, in a sense, falling off of a cliff. I was giving an example not long ago of individuals that cheat on their spouses, on their loved ones. When the deed is done, they wake up, they're like, they look at each other, or one of them says, "What did I just do? I hope no one finds out." He or she will now start to panic. When? After the deed is done. They're off the edge. They are falling. You can't turn the clock backwards. You cannot undo what just happened. Now, the problem is, many people would look at that action itself as the problem. But I would say no. No. It didn't start at the actual, committing, let's say, adultery. That is not, the act itself is not it only. It started long time ago, when you looked at each other a certain way, when you started entertaining the thoughts of, I wonder how it could be if, instead of my husband, instead of my wife, instead of my girlfriend, instead of my boyfriend, I actually have him or her instead. So you already are starting to engage in mental deeds of adultery, which the Buddha always would go back to. The thought itself is the most powerful. Why? Because you're already leaking. There's an inflow of terrible things. The sewage is coming into your living room, into your bedroom. What do? You need to immediately get to work and into action and remove it, plug it up, close it. Stop emailing, stop texting each other. That person, yeah, but it makes me feel good. My life is very boring otherwise. Well, no. You need to think about the outcome. What is it that I'm going to experience? This would be a perfect example of walking towards the cliff. Well, if you're getting that far close to the edge, you're going to really get to experience the fall. You were not going to experience the fall if you were at your house, on your sofa. You have to get yourself there first. Instead of waiting, the next morning, after that, a few seconds after the deed is done, the betrayal, the cheating, there's nothing you could do about it anymore. Now you're going to, how can I actually save my relationship? How can I, there's no way of undoing it. It's done. It's broken. For that, we practice sila, so that you don't walk towards the cliff. Because once you're there, you're taking on your shoulders the responsibility of what happens to you when you hit the ground after the fall. Because once a person is in birth state, that means they pass the point of no return. Once you're falling, you've passed the point of no return. This is why I said you cannot pull on the brakes as you're falling. There's no way of stopping you halfway in midair. It's done. So it's a series of events that you closed a blind eye to. You didn't care. You said, no, it's okay. Let me go with this. Let me see where this will take you. Well, it will take you straight down, splat. You know, Dover is a place in I think, the British Isles, and also there's very sharp cliffs in Ireland, in Scotland, and other places around the world. But those are very mesmerizing. I've always wondered how it would feel like to get, to really that close. And, if you get really close from these pictures, when I was growing up and I would see, it's dangerous. That's why they have to have a line of, protection. People don't be stupid to go all the way to the edge, because sometimes they give way and you fall hundreds and hundreds of feet down. And you die, splat on these jagged rocks. For that, we need to use our common sense. For that, we have to use hiri and ottappa, the wise sense of shame, and wise, responsible sense of restraining yourself. One is internal, the other one is external directed. Internal as in the form of, well, I'm thinking these. How would I feel if my loved one is also thinking that? Imagine sitting across the table, dinner table, with your loved one, and somehow being able to access their thoughts, their hearts, what they're thinking of. And you find out that they're thinking about, not you, they're thinking about someone else, want to be with someone else. How would you feel? This is already giving you a sense of internally feeling the magnitude of damage that your thoughts could have. Now, if you don't have such thoughts, if you don't have that reaction, if you don't see that my thoughts would cause such pain that I'm experiencing to my loved one, then chances are it's not a thought that has to do with generating hiri in you, the shame, sense of inner shame. It's a healthy thing to have, that inner sense of wise shame. We've done, as a society, a major damage to remove shame completely. No, you need to have sense of shame. Otherwise, you see people walking around doing whatever that's what happened, actually. In recent years in society, people have been shamefully doing things without, and continue to do so. So when you have that, you then start thinking about the external phase of hiri and ottappa, that has to do with, well, if those people that I care about and appreciate and respect, they were to find out what I'm thinking about, what I'm pondering, what I'm even doing maybe, or saying here, how would they react to that? Would they find it, would they admonish it? Would they criticize me? Would they chastise me for it? Usually if it's a bad thing, and it will be a clash immediately in your mind, you will stop yourself halfway. Suddenly you're like, oh, no, I can't do this. Why though? Because those people that I respect would look down upon such a thing. Then you know you have to step back from this. So we've glorified jati too, by the way. There are people who advocate for re-experiencing of life, completely eliminating the horrific experiences that we've had while teenagers. The schools, that we had to go through. Years of delusion as children. The painful experiences growing up in a body. And perhaps having lived a whole lifetime, also the pain that we experienced in the body. It could be psychological, emotional, and trying to recalibrate or reorient yourself so that you can have a decent life in a healthy, decently healthy body. Get a job. All those things come too, when you have jati. It's not just another perfectly packaged life waiting for you. Because, as the Buddha constantly reminded his students, we have done more harmful things in past lives than good. So the very fact that we are in a human body does not necessarily mean that the next birth we get for ourselves will be equally pleasant one. Or even better. The chances for a worse death is always there. Why? Because of the accumulation of bad deeds we've done to other people. Karma. You don't remember it does not mean that it hasn't happened or you haven't done it. We've done many, many things, good or bad. Chances are more bad in this life, which we don't remember, do we? But we have done them. But simply because we don't recall them does not mean that they never happened. So, to reduce the possibilities of another birth is wonderful, because that means you're pulling yourself away from the edge of the cliff. You're coming back to your safety. And safety has to do with what? Safety has to do with seeing and experience the possibility of it. You ask yourself, is this going to cause me or anybody else harm? This is when you're responsibly thinking. There is such a thing. It's so powerful. Is this going to cause me or anybody any harm? And when we live from this purview, from this position of action, because mental action is very important, if not the most important aspect of our actions, then already you stopped it. It doesn't even turn into a verbal action. And definitely it won't turn into a physical action, where you would, let's say, using that extreme example of a couple cheating on their spouses, on their loved ones, like thieves. That means you already practice hiri and ottappa. You have a sense of wise shame, wise this sense of remorse. It's like, no, I would never put myself into that horrific state of having to deal with, oh my Lord, what did I do? That means you've already fallen though. So, but when it's like waking up from a terrible nightmare and all of a sudden finding yourself in the safety of your bed and it's like, oh, I'm so glad it was a dream. It was a terrible nightmare. That's how it will feel like when you stop yourself at that moment of your thoughts. So this is where we practice sila, virtuous thinking, virtuous processing of information. So we don't just go flailing around just uncontrollably without any restraint with any kind of thought that pops into your head. No. We have a duty there to protect ourselves from the thoughts. Similarly with the subvocal speech, meaning what we tell ourselves, as well as what we say externally to the world, the people around us. If I didn't yell at that person, the neighbor over there, that time in the past, today we probably would have had a good relationship. So can you think about it before you do it, before you commit to it? This is also responsible. And then the physical aspect comes. When you find yourself in a very, shall we say, tempting situation, where anybody else in your shoes might have done it, But you yourself hold yourself strong and you say, no, because I'm thinking what will happen to me after the deed. The action was already committed. So it doesn't happen just with one action. It's a series of actions, no matter how minuscule or insignificant they might be. They're all leading you to the fall from the edge, where you cannot stop it anymore. And that is birth. So make sure that as it relates to the birth within life, birth of experiences from moment to moment, you are choosing, which means you have control, despite what some biologists, so-called modern biologists, keep saying, or, you do have control with your thoughts as actions. When you look at your thoughts healthily and look at them and say, no, I can put a stop here. So this is where you're changing the attitude. You're checking your motives, real motives. This is where rational thinking comes to play, instead of just going with the flow, as they say, and ruining your life, ruining your day. Because we are alive, we have a life that we're living. You're listening to this recording, and so you're alive. So there's the momentum. We aren't dead yet, which means that every decision we make is a conduit, is a doorway to a new birth of new experiences for ourselves. So am I maintaining a path of constant repeatability of the wrong, of the erroneous, of the thing that brings me bad results, to bad actions? And if that's the case, then I need to change the trajectory and walk away from the edge. A person who constantly makes mistakes, I used to know people who would constantly make bad choices in relationships, or they kept on, they might find a person that they're connected to, and then they end up ruining it by going and cheating. And when I would ask them, why did you do that? They would say, well, I'm sorry, it's like, they would be in tears, of course. Well, not of course all the time, but they would just say, I don't know what I did. Maybe it's just how I am. Well, not how you are, but how you are allowing yourself to be. There's a difference. And if you are in control of your thoughts, and you're asking yourself, if I do these steps, if I go ahead with this, and if I continue, let's say, using that example of cheating, if I agree to meet him or her over there for, drinks or coffee or something, or email him back and forth, where is this leading us to? Where is this leading me to? Where is this leading my relationship, my safe relationship with this other person whom I'm supposed to be faithful to? Where would that get better or worse? Of course worse. You're pouring gasoline on the house, and you're looking for matches or something that sparks a fire. Well, how did the fire occur? Was it because of the matchstick? No, you poured a container full of gasoline over time on this thing. Don't come later on saying, oh, what happened? No, nothing happened by itself. We made choices. We got ourselves all the way to the edge of the cliff. So make sure when you're about to commit to an action, you gave it some thought. Is this going to cause me or anybody harm? Anybody, anytime. So is this, in a way, self-centered? Am I carelessly doing something? Because if it is a truly good action, it should give you a sense of happiness and state of calm after, sense of tranquility. And then you look at other people's faces, they're also happy for that action that you committed or you didn't commit. So if it is an action that brings pleasure, however, to your senses, chances are, and it's only that, chances are it's going to bring you harm and others. So here I'm making the distinction between pleasure and happiness. Happiness hasn't got anything to do with the sense pleasures, really, when you think of it. Sometimes it does, but in reality, happiness does not depend on your senses. When I mean senses, I mean the 5 carnal desires and stimulations of your eyes, what you see, what you touch, what you hear, what you taste, what you smell, those. Unfortunately, the society we live in has made us believe that happiness comes from that. And that's not the case. So is this going to bring me true happiness, which brings us joy? And when it does, is there a possibility that it might give pain to others? You know? When you do these small, small adjustments in your mind, you already have control over your birth. Whether it's this next birth and then as far as events in life, the same life that we're talking about, or an actual next birth in another life. Because that means when you're taking these steps, you are also committing positive, wholesome karma, which means you're increasing your credit, okay? You're increasing the chances of a healthier birth. And that's why we practice the 5 precepts of not to kill, not to harm intentionally anyone, not to take anything that doesn't belong to us intentionally, not to engage any kind of sexual activity that could bring somebody, anybody, including ourselves, our bodies, any pain, any harm, not to lie or speak falsehood intentionally, knowingly, for the sake of gaining something. And 5th, not to take any kind of intoxicants, any kind, unless they're medication that helps us with some disorder or some disease. When you live like this, already you're protecting yourself and protecting others. And that's what sila is, really. No one is, other than you, no one is accountable for your sila. But the greatest happiness will come because you maintain sila. That's why a virtuous, truly virtuous person who lives with a virtuous conduct is a happy person. Really. They haven't done anything to anyone, or they're not doing anything. Whatever is past, but they will never go back there again. That's the thing. Angulimala killed almost 1,000 people. That's easy to say in a sentence, but he turned his life around the moment he saw the Buddha, whom he was trying to kill, by the way, to make it the 1,000th victim of his. But he had a change right there on the spot. And from that point on, he never even had a thought of harming. He was a protector, in fact. His name they had changed his name to Angulimala, but his original name was Ahinsaka, which means non-harm, not harming any living being. And he became an arahant, perfected being, who never has to go ever through jati, has nothing to do with the cliff anymore. He lived a happy life, even though he was torturous because he had to deal with the impact of the harm he had given to people, physically abusing him, understandably so, until he died eventually. But he died free. He was no longer going to go through jati ever again, because he was not giving any opportunities for new jatis to happen while he was alive, in the same old direction of going and harming people. That was ended, that was done for. He never continued that. That is in control. So I hope this helps. Sukhiyot.